They had a government permission slip. The soldiers had just read it. Then 4 of them turned their horses around and rode back to the hill and killed all 6 of them. 3 women, 3 children. 1, a nursing infant. They took the coats off the bodies before they left. The colony actually tried them for it, convicted all 4, sentenced them to death. And then did something it had never done before, and never did again. To understand why this was the only time, we have to go back to what the colony spent 25 years building and what it spent 1 year destroying. In 1651, a Puritan minister named John Eliot established the first of what he called praying towns, communities built for indigenous people who converted to Christianity, adopted English dress, English law, English names, English governance. 14 of these towns spread across Massachusetts over the next 2 decades. Hundreds of Nipmuc people became what the English called Christian Indians. They built houses, they learned to read, they submitted to English courts, they gave everything the colony asked for. In return, the colony promised them protection. By 1675, some of those same praying Indians were serving as soldiers in the English colonial militia. One of them was a man named Andrew Pittimee. He scouted, he fought, he carried an English weapon under English officers. While he was on campaign, his wife was living in a supervised camp near Cambridge. So was his sister. So were their children. Then the war changed everything. In June 1675, a conflict called Metacom's War erupted across New England. The Wampanoag leader the English called King Philip led a coalition of indigenous nations against the colonies. Towns burned, thousands died, and then the colony did something that told you exactly what the praying towns had really been. In August 1675, colonial authorities confined all native allies to 5 designated towns. In October, the General Court went further. Every Christian Indian in Natick was to be removed, by force if necessary, to Deer Island in Boston Harbor. This was not a precaution. It was a punishment for something they hadn't done. The people who had prayed in English, fought for the English, submitted to English courts, loaded onto boats and ferried to a rocky, barren island as winter was coming. No adequate food, no shelter, no medicine. The colony knew. The colony gave the order. Up to half the people interned on Deer Island died there, of starvation and exposure, within sight of the city that sent them. Andrew Pittimee was still fighting for the colony while his community was dying in the harbor. In May 1676, the survivors were released back into an active war zone, under close colonial supervision, dependent on passes for every movement. The passes told them where they could go, when, how far. It was one of those passes that authorized 3 women and 3 children to walk to Hurtleberry Hill, a berry gathering ground about 4 miles from Watertown Mill, on a day in August 1676. 2 of the women were wives of English Allied soldiers. The third was a young woman. 3 children came with them, including a nursing infant. They were doing exactly what their permission slip said they could do. A colonial patrol, 11 or 12 soldiers, found them on the hillside. They examined the pass. They confirmed it was legitimate. Some soldiers gave the women bread and cheese. Then the patrol moved on. 4 men did not go with them. Daniel Goebel, a yeoman farmer from the Concord area, turned his horse around. His nephew Stephen turned with him. So did Daniel Hoare and Nathaniel Wilder. They rode back to the hill. They had just read that pass. They knew exactly who those women were. They went back anyway. What they did there is recorded in the account of Daniel Gookin, the colony's superintendent of Indian affairs. 2 squaws, wives to 2 of our Indian soldiers, and 1 young woman and 3 children, whereof 1 was a nursing infant. All 6 were shot and hacked to death. The killers stripped the coats from the bodies. Then they rode home. Somewhere on campaign, Andrew Pittimee stopped receiving word from his wife. An indigenous guide named John Stoolmester had come back from the direction of Hurtleberry Hill and couldn't find the women. Pittimee passed word to his colonial commander. The man who had served the colony that interned his community had to ask his English officer to send soldiers to look for his wife. They found the bodies on the hill. The coats were gone. 4 days later, All 4 men stood before the Court of Assistance in Boston. They were tried. They were convicted. All 4 were sentenced to death. The historian Jenny Hale Pulsifer identified what made this extraordinary. It was the only time in the entire war that anyone was punished for killing a Christian Indian. Every other killing went unpunished. All 4 were found guilty. All 4 were sentenced to die. But not all 4 were equal before the courts of Massachusetts Bay. Daniel Hoare and Nathaniel Wilder were not yeomen. They had connections, church connections, social standing. Within weeks of the conviction, both men petitioned for mercy, presented their ties to the clergy, and offered fines in lieu of their lives. The court granted it. They were fined. They went home. The Goebels had no such connections, no patrons, no church standing to leverage. Same crime, same verdict. 2 outcomes decided entirely by who had the right relationships. The colony was not delivering justice. It was demonstrating who controlled the machinery of violence and extending mercy according to rank, not accountability. The killer's own defense had tried to invoke a colonial law authorizing the killing of any Indian found more than 1 mile from a designated village. The colony's own law, written by the colony's own courts. That defense failed. But the fact that 4 men who had just confirmed a legitimate permission pass still believed they could point to that statute and be cleared tells you everything about the system that produced this massacre. The colony built the machine. Then it hanged 2 men for using it without authorization. Stephen Goebel was executed first. Then Daniel Goebel fell ill, too sick to stand on a gallows. The colony waited for him to recover enough to hang him. On September 26, 1676, he was walked to the execution site in Boston. Increase Mather recorded what happened. Goebel was hanged on the same rope that had just been used to execute Sagamore Sam, Shoshanim, a Nipmuc sachem who had tried to surrender and been killed anyway. 1 rope, 2 men, an English murderer of Christian Indians, and a native leader who sought peace. The colony did not distinguish between English lawbreakers and native resistors when its authority was at stake. It dispatched both because it could. That was not justice. That was sovereignty. The 6 people murdered on Hurtleberry Hill have no names in any surviving record. The men who killed them were named, tried, entered into court records. Their deaths logged in the diaries of the colony's most prominent men. The women and children were recorded as 2 squaws, wives to 2 of our Indian soldiers, 1 young woman, and 3 children, whereof 1 was a nursing infant. That is all. The erasure was not accidental. The record preserved the people who mattered to the people keeping the records. Hurtleberry Hill is believed to be the place now called Mount Misery, in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Today it is 227 acres of conservation land, 7 miles of trails, and in summer, blueberry bushes on the hillside, possibly descendants of the same plants those women were picking when 4 men turned their horses around. There is no memorial, no marker, no sign that names what happened there. Thousands walk those trails every year with no way of knowing from the ground itself what ground they are standing on. That silence is not an oversight. Oversights get corrected when someone notices. This has had nearly 350 years to be noticed. Andrew Pittimee, who served the colony that imprisoned his community, who lost his wife on a hill where she had every legal right to be, who watched the courts pardon half the men who killed her, disappears from the historical record after the war ended. We don't know what happened to him. We don't know if he ever walked back to that hill. We know the hill has no sign. And we know that somewhere in the colonial record, in the account of a man named Gookin who tried to protect the people his government was destroying, there are the words, 1 young woman and 3 children, whereof 1 was a nursing infant. They had names. The record just didn't keep them. The hill is still there. The blueberries still grow. If you want to know what happened in the other towns, the ones that burned, the captives who were marched north and never came back, we'll be on those trails too.